The wind blew dry and hot through the little town of Silver Creek, kicking up dust that clung to boots and faces. The saloon doors swung open, and silence followed as Luke Turner stepped out, his hat tipped low, his boots heavy from the fight. Just moments earlier, he had single-handedly stopped 3 bandits who'd tried to rob the bank, dragging them out by their collars and tossing them in front of Sheriff Bill's jail. Now the townsfolk were gathered in awe, cheering for the man they didn't even know. Sheriff Bill, a wide-shouldered man with a thick mustache and a booming voice, stood in front of the saloon, lifting his whiskey glass. "You saved our town, stranger," he said proudly. "Silver Creek owes you a debt." Luke adjusted his hat and gave a modest nod. "No debt owed, Sheriff. Just doing what's right." But the sheriff wouldn't let it go. He grinned, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can choose any woman in this town, cowboy. Any woman you want, she'll be yours." The crowd erupted in laughter and excitement, women whispering and giggling, men slapping Luke on the back. Everyone waited for him to choose Daisy, the mayor's daughter, known for her long golden hair and perfect smile. She stood at the front, eyes shining with expectation. Luke scanned the crowd, his deep brown eyes moving past the pretty dresses, the painted lips, and the smiles that wanted attention. Then his gaze stopped. Near the edge of the square, sitting quietly by the old well, was Mary. She was heavier than most, dressed in a plain brown dress that hung loose around her, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her skirt as she avoided every gaze. When Luke looked at her, something in his chest tightened. She wasn't laughing or pretending, she was just there, real and human. He stepped forward, and the noise died down. "Then I'll marry her," he said clearly, pointing toward Mary. For a moment, no one breathed. Then laughter exploded. Daisy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "You're joking," someone yelled. But Luke didn't move, his face serious. "I'm not." Sheriff Bill frowned, thinking it was some kind of prank, but Luke's voice stayed steady. "She's the one I choose." The sheriff's smile faded into disbelief. "You're serious, son?" Luke nodded once. "Dead serious." Mary's eyes widened, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it. People were laughing, pointing at her, but all she could see was Luke's calm face. She stood up slowly and ran home, tears burning her eyes. That night, the town couldn't stop talking. "He must be crazy," they said. "Why her?" Daisy threw her hair over her shoulder and swore Luke would regret it. The next morning, Luke rode out to the small cabin where Mary lived with her mother. The path was quiet, and his horse's hooves echoed on the dry dirt. Mary saw him coming from the window and froze. She didn't want pity or charity. When he knocked on the door, she hesitated but opened it slightly. Luke removed his hat, his voice low and gentle. "Miss Mary, I know what you must think. But I meant what I said yesterday." She stared at him, her eyes red from crying. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Luke smiled softly. "Because I saw something honest in your eyes. You weren't trying to be seen, and that's what made me see you." Mary's lips trembled. "You don't have to do this to make a point." He shook his head. "I don't do anything halfway. A man's word matters, and I gave mine." Behind them, Sheriff Bill appeared on horseback, watching from a distance, shaking his head. "You'll be the talk of the town forever, cowboy," he warned. Luke looked back at him with a quiet smile. "Then let them talk." He turned back to Mary. "I didn't choose you to mock you. I chose you because sometimes the rarest gold is buried deep, and folks are too blind to dig for it." Mary felt her breath catch. For the first time, someone had spoken to her not with pity but with respect. The wind swept through her hair, and Luke tipped his hat again. "I'll see you at the church, Miss Mary." He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving her standing at the doorway, her heart torn between fear and a feeling she hadn't known in years, hope. The morning of the wedding arrived with a bright sun that made Silver Creek glow like gold dust in the distance. The whole town gathered at the small white church at the edge of Main Street, the same church where everyone had been baptized, married, or buried for generations. But today, no one came for prayer, they came for a show. People whispered and laughed in the pews, curious to see the cowboy who'd lost his mind and the girl he'd chosen. Mary stood inside a small room at the back of the church, her heart pounding so hard it made her hands tremble. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that her mother had stitched overnight, plain but clean. Her reflection in the cracked mirror made her sigh. She didn't look like a bride, she looked like a joke waiting to happen. Outside, Luke stood straight in his black coat, hat in hand, waiting near the altar. His face stayed calm even as he heard the chuckles around him. Daisy walked by in a bright pink dress, smirking, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, "He'll change his mind once he sees her walk in." But he didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes on the door. When Mary finally stepped inside, the laughter quieted a little. Her steps were slow, and she couldn't meet anyone's gaze. But when she looked up and saw Luke's steady, kind eyes waiting for her, something inside her eased. She took a deep breath and walked to him. The preacher's voice shook a little as he began. "Dearly beloved, we gather here," but his words drowned beneath the whispers. Luke took Mary's hand, rough and warm, and held it firm. "I, Luke Turner, take you, Mary, as my wife," he said clearly, and his voice filled the room. When it was her turn, her voice trembled, but she spoke every word. The crowd still laughed, but Luke didn't care. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Luke didn't hesitate. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. The laughter stopped. A silence heavier than stone filled the room. For the first time in her life, Mary felt respected. After the ceremony, Luke took her hand and led her outside where his horse was waiting. The crowd watched as he helped her up and rode away toward his ranch, leaving behind the noise of the town. The ranch was quiet, surrounded by fields and oak trees, the air thick with the scent of hay and dust. Inside, Luke made her tea and set out bread and stew. "You must be tired," he said kindly. Mary looked at him, confused. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Luke leaned back in his chair. "Because that's what you deserve." She blinked back tears, unsure if she should believe him. That night, as the stars came out, Luke told her she could take the bedroom and he'd sleep by the fire. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "We'll take it one day at a time." For the first time in her life, Mary felt safe. Days turned into weeks. Mary learned to cook for two, to feed the animals, and to help in the fields. Her soft hands grew rough, her cheeks tanned from the sun. Luke treated her like an equal, never once mocking her size or shaming her. Still, doubt lingered in her heart. She wondered if this was some test or joke he'd regret. One afternoon, Daisy and two other town girls rode out pretending to bring congratulations. They smiled sweetly, but their words cut deep. "Must be hard keeping a cowboy happy," Daisy teased, her voice dripping with poison. Mary bit her lip, pretending not to hear, but Luke stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands. "That's enough," he said coldly. "You got something to say it to me." Daisy smirked, but the steel in his voice made her stop. "We were just being friendly," she said, riding off quickly. That evening, Mary sat by the fire, eyes wet with silent tears. Luke sat beside her and said softly, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." She looked at him and whispered, "I just don't understand why you chose me." He poked at the fire and said, "Because I saw someone who didn't hide behind lies or makeup." "You don't pretend, Mary. That's worth more than gold." She looked down, her heart fluttering with a feeling she couldn't name. Outside, the wind howled, the stars glimmered, and for the first time, she smiled at the man who had turned her life from shame into something close to love. The quiet peace of Silver Creek didn't last long. One dusky evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the town lanterns flickered on, a rumble of hooves echoed through the dusty street. The same bandits Luke had once captured had returned, meaner and thirstier for revenge. They stormed the town with guns blazing, shooting into the air and yelling curses. People ran for cover, doors slammed, and windows shattered. At the ranch, Luke heard the gunfire and knew trouble had found them again. He grabbed his rifle from the wall and turned to Mary, who stood frozen near the doorway. "Stay inside," he told her, his tone calm but urgent. She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm coming with you." He stared at her, surprised, but before he could argue, she had already thrown a shawl over her shoulders and ran toward the horse. They reached the town to find chaos, buildings burning, frightened women huddled behind barrels, children crying for their parents. Luke jumped off his horse and started firing warning shots, his aim sharp and steady. The bandits scattered for cover, but they were too many. Mary ran toward the church, guiding a group of townspeople inside for safety. Her heart pounded, but she didn't stop, even when smoke filled her lungs and her dress caught a spark from the fire. "Get the children out," she shouted, pushing them toward the back door. Suddenly, she heard a scream. One of the little boys was trapped inside a burning barn. Without thinking, she ran in, covering her face with her arm. Flames danced around her as she crawled on the ground, choking on smoke. She found the boy hiding behind a haystack, crying. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said softly, pulling him close. With all her strength, she dragged him out just as the roof collapsed behind them. Luke turned just in time to see her stumble out of the smoke, the child in her arms. His chest tightened with fear and pride. He ran to her, catching her before she fell. "Mary!" he shouted, brushing the soot from her face. She coughed and smiled faintly. "He's safe," she whispered before fainting in his arms. The battle soon ended when Luke shot the bandits' leader and the rest fled into the hills. The sheriff and his men put out the fires, and by sunrise, the town was saved. When Mary woke up in her bed at the ranch, her arm wrapped in a bandage, Luke sat beside her, eyes tired but soft. "You were the bravest soul out there," he said. "You saved lives." She smiled weakly. "I just did what anyone would do." He shook his head. "No, Mary. Not everyone would run into fire for someone else." Word of her bravery spread fast, and soon, the same townsfolk who once mocked her were bringing food, flowers, and apologies. The sheriff visited and said with a proud smile, "You've got more courage than half the men in Silver Creek, ma'am." Mary blushed, unsure how to take the praise, but in her heart, something new bloomed, a sense of belonging. Weeks later, life returned to normal. The ranch fields were green again, and laughter often filled the air. Mary had changed, not just in confidence but in spirit. She carried herself taller, smiled more easily, and her laughter had a warmth that even the coldest hearts in town began to notice. Luke watched her from the porch one evening as she hung laundry in the wind, her hair loose, the golden sunset painting her face. He felt something deep stir within him. He walked over, took the basket from her hands, and said softly, "You've been running yourself ragged. Come dance with me instead." She laughed shyly. "Dance? There's no music." He smiled, taking her hand. "There is if you listen close." He hummed a slow tune, swaying her gently in his arms. The moment felt timeless, the wind, the fading sun, the two of them moving like they were the only souls in the world. As the night settled in, they sat on the porch together. Luke looked at her and said, "You've changed this place, Mary. You've changed me." She blushed, looking at the stars. "I just tried to be who I am." He leaned closer, his voice low. "That's what I love about you." Her heart skipped, and before she could speak, his lips brushed hers, soft, certain, full of the promise of forever. Under that vast western sky, the cowboy and the woman once called a joke found something real and rare, a love built not on beauty or pride, but on courage, kindness, and the kind of truth that lasts a lifetime. The town of Silver Creek had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Months after the fire and the attack, peace finally returned, but the story of Luke and Mary had become a legend that people whispered about at the saloon and told newcomers at the general store. Some spoke with respect, others with curiosity, but everyone agreed on one thing: the cowboy who married the wrong woman had turned out to be the luckiest man in the territory. One cool autumn morning, Sheriff Bill rode out to Luke's ranch. The rising sun cast long shadows across the golden fields where Mary was hanging laundry and humming softly. The sheriff stopped his horse, tipping his hat. "Mornin', Miss Mary," he said kindly, a tone she wasn't used to hearing from him. She smiled back. "Good morning, Sheriff. Coffee's hot if you'd like some." He dismounted and joined Luke by the porch, where 2 mugs of coffee waited. For a long moment, the sheriff just stared at the horizon, silent. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know, Turner, when you said you'd marry her, I laughed harder than anyone else. I figured you were crazy or drunk, or both." Luke grinned faintly. "Maybe I was crazy. Crazy enough to see what others couldn't." The sheriff chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, well, maybe I'm the fool. I've been wearing this badge so long, I forgot what real courage looks like. Watching her that night in the fire, I'll never forget it." Mary walked over with fresh biscuits, setting them down gently. The sheriff looked up at her and, for the first time, didn't see the obese girl, or the outcast. He saw a woman with strength in her eyes and warmth in her smile. "You've made this town better, ma'am," he said sincerely. Mary's cheeks turned red. "I just bake bread and keep my husband out of trouble." The sheriff laughed. "That's a mighty big job." Later that day, he returned to town and offered Mary a small shop near Main Street that had been sitting empty for years. Silver Creek could use a bakery, he said. Your bread's already famous. Mary hesitated, but Luke encouraged her, saying, "You've got something people need, Mary. Don't hide it." Within weeks, Mary's hearth opened, and the smell of warm bread and pies filled the air every morning. People who once ignored her now greeted her by name, and children ran to her window to watch her knead dough with strong, gentle hands. Luke often stopped by after working the fields, tipping his hat to her as if seeing her for the first time all over again. The sheriff became one of her best customers, always saying, "You bake better than my mama ever did." Daisy rarely showed her face anymore. Some said she moved away, others said she couldn't bear seeing how happy Luke and Mary had become. Silver Creek slowly forgot the gossip and the cruelty. What remained was respect, earned, not given. Years rolled by, and Silver Creek continued to grow. Luke's hair began to gray at the temples, and Mary's face softened with time, but their bond never faded. One golden evening, they sat on their porch, the same porch that had seen storms, laughter, and love. The land stretched endlessly before them, the sky painted orange and pink. Mary watched children playing near the fence, the neighbors' kids who often visited for her cookies. Their laughter filled the air, and Luke smiled. "You know," he said softly, "they still talk about that day in town when I said I'd marry you." She chuckled. "I imagine they do." He turned to her, eyes warm. "They call me the luckiest fool in Silver Creek. And they're right." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You could have had anyone, Luke." "Why me?" He wrapped his arm around her and said, "Because when I looked at you, I saw the kind of woman who doesn't run when life gets hard. The kind who stays." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "You saw me when no one else did." A gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of fresh bread from her bakery in town. The sheriff rode by on his horse, older now but still sharp-eyed. He tipped his hat to them. "Evenin', you two lovebirds," he called out with a grin. Luke waved, laughing. "Evenin', Sheriff. Still chasing bandits?" The sheriff shook his head. "Nope. These days, I just chase the smell of Mary's pies." As he rode off, the couple sat quietly, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Mary reached for Luke's hand, her fingers still strong and warm after all these years. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. Luke smiled, squeezing her hand. "Not for a single second." The sky deepened into twilight, the stars slowly appearing. In that peaceful silence, the cowboy who had chosen the most unexpected woman and the woman who had once been the town's laughter now sat as the heart of Silver Creek, living proof that love, when real, never follows the rules of beauty or pride. It simply finds two souls brave enough to see each other clearly and hold on forever.